Prince William wasn't just raised in the palace, he was raised for the palace. As a result, when his younger brother Harry fell deeply in love with Meghan Markle, William didn't jump to judgment. Instead, he watched and observed, and what he saw didn't sit well with him. After all, his life had been planned out with royal duties, ceremonial expectations, and the quiet understanding that one day he'd be king. William had already encountered several popular personalities, including an actress. But something about how swiftly things were happening and how Harry appeared to be changing caused him to pause behind the headlines and grins. A change caught William's attention. Despite Meghan's charm and self-assurance, it seemed that she was more interested in the limelight than the family she was joining. And Harry wasn't just in love, he was captured. In an attempt to speak to Harry like a brother rather than a potential monarch, William allegedly advised him to slow down. He said, "Really think about the long term, get to know her." It wasn't a command, rather it was a plea, but Harry didn't want to hear it. Perhaps he felt judged, or perhaps he thought William didn't understand how real it was. Whatever the reason, that conversation didn't bring them closer. It broke something between them, and from that point on, their bond was never quite the same. It's not that Meghan stepped in between them like a fairy tale villain. Rather, Harry had chosen a new path that gradually distanced him from life. He had always known, but this is where things got complex. He may have seen it as defining his own identity, but William saw it as abandoning all they were taught to defend. Meghan wasn't born into the royal family. She didn't fall in love with a prince and end up in a palace. She was intelligent, ambitious, and calculated, and that's perfectly acceptable. However, when ambition and royalty are combined, you have to be ready to follow certain rules, which Meghan wasn't. Or perhaps she was, and she didn't care about people. According to those close to the palace, it began modestly with a refusal to adhere to dress regulations and a confrontation with assistants. But it didn't end there. The energy that Meghan brought to the family wasn't subtle. It was a sensation that garnered media attention. The Meghan Markle show's Harry, who remained devoted to her despite the problems and difficult relationships, soon turned her opulent existence with all its limitations into a backdrop for something else entirely. The media couldn't get enough of her, and it seemed neither could. The boy who once proudly marched behind his mother's coffin with William, who served in Afghanistan, was now pursuing something completely different. William watched it unfold with disbelief, not because he resented Meghan, but because he saw the red flags. He knew the demands of the crown, the sacrifices it required, and he knew that he had to make certain sacrifices. Harry believed he was choosing love, but William feared he was being duped. Years later, that old warning still rings true. Don't rush this. However, the wedding took place, the split ensued, and the fallout behind the palace walls continued to unfold more quickly than anyone had anticipated. The staff, protocols, and centuries-old customs all seemed to be irrelevant anymore, and Meghan, who had once been viewed as a breath of fresh air, was rapidly turning into a storm as reports began to surface. Aides stopped spreading rumors about fights over everything from flower girl dresses to seating charts. But more than the specifics, it was the atmosphere that changed. The monarchy, which had always been based on stoicism and restraint, felt as though it was being attacked from within. On the outside, everything appeared to be fine, with smiles at events, official portraits, and baby announcements. But on the inside, insiders whispered that Meghan didn't just want to join the royal family. She wanted to change it, not through service or tradition, but through. She introduced Hollywood to Buckingham, and the palace was clueless when she made the decision to step away from royal duties. It was presented as a shared agreement and a modern approach to monarchy, but many involved knew otherwise. Harry and Meghan wanted to be royalty as freelancers, not royal employees, while the stern and experienced queen sought to hold everything together. They wanted the benefits of royal life, like titles, security, and international renown, but without the obligations. William and Meghan were already burdened with the future of the crown, and they were furious not only at the decision, but also at the way it was handled. There was no warning, no real discussion, just a website, a press release, and a PR storm that portrayed the institution as being out of date and oppressive. The message was clear. Harry and Meghan were leaving, and they were taking charge of their own story in America. The couple quickly changed their brand. Oprah interviews, Netflix offered podcasts. Harry and Meghan were portrayed in every headline as victims of a cruel, callous system that was so archaic. For those who knew the family personally, it didn't add up. There were definitely problems with the institution, but the amount of drama, the public exposure, and the carefully staged victimization made it all feel theatrical. Meanwhile, Harry, the brash and feisty prince who used to dance with schoolchildren in Lotto and joke with soldiers in Afghanistan, seemed to fade. His appearances were more reserved, his words more practiced, and friends said he wasn't the same. Some thought he missed home, while others thought he just didn't understand how to go back. Not because he was proud, but because he was hurt, William kept his distance. He had tried, he had warned, and now his own brother was tearing apart the institution they were both born into in the world press. The betrayal was painful not because Harry left, but because of the way he did it. The accusations, the interviews, the total lack of discretion. Nevertheless, the machine continued to run, royal engagements continued, Kate stepped up, Charles prepared for his reign, but if something remained broken, the firm could survive scandals and tabloids, but a split? Between the two brothers that struck differently. They were supposed to be the team's future, heirs, and future, but now they were strangers, divided not by location, but by decisions. Meghan, on the other hand, was thriving. She was speaking on panels, hosting power players, and trading palaces. For penthouses, as well as state dinners for studio meetings, she had everything: money, fame, freedom, and everything. But there was always someone holding the match when things got heated. And an increasing number of people began to question whether it had been in her hand all along. Harry stood at a strange crossroads, publicly defiant, privately a drift he had made, standing by it, defending it on every stage. But in the quieter moments behind the practice smiles and camera-ready soundbites, there were cracks. He had become more reserved, less playful, and more cautious with his remarks, according to acquaintances who had known him for years. It was as if he had spent too much time trying to convince everyone, including himself, that he hadn't made a mistake. He frequently talked about protecting his family and keeping Meghan and the children safe from the chaos of royal life. But in reality, the chaos had only changed. Instead of tabloids, there were podcasts and online rumors, and the world continued to watch and judge them. However, now that there was no longer a crown to rely on or an organization to protect them, that protection he saw came at a price. He was at odds with his brother, his relationship with his father was strained, and even his standing in Britain, which had once been a place of admiration and affection, had dimmed, and he had become a symbol of something else entirely. This is a cautionary tale about a royal who left and was unable to return. William was pressured by the monarchy to keep him from pouting, and although he made appearances, took initiative, and gave speeches, his anger had cooled into something worse. Behind closed doors, he had lost his brother, not to tragedy, but to pride, not to a cause, but to a person, and that wound didn't heal easily, but he continued to extend olive branches in silence, allowed private messages. Harry, however, hardly ever replied. And the trust was lost, possibly forever, because too many private moments had been made public, and too many family tales had been twisted for dramatic effect. One brother can only tolerate so much when the other won't stop filming. Meghan, on the other hand, remained in the spotlight with every appearance and transaction, continuing to build her empire, but her story was shifting. The once compassionate character was now being questioned by former co-workers. Palace officials confirmed rumors, and even old friends stopped talking or vanished when so many people left a person's life. Eventually, it becomes less about coincidence and more about character. Her brand, which had been meticulously cultivated, was beginning to show signs of wear, and public sentiment was changing. Not significantly, but noticeably, there was weariness. The victim narrative had been repeated too often, and people were asking more difficult questions, such as why there were so many feuds, accusations, and why, even though she left the royal family, the spotlight never dimmed the truth that no one wanted to acknowledge was that Meghan never really left the stage. She only changed costumes. Harry, in an attempt to shield her from the pressures of royalty, unintentionally gave her a larger platform, one that came with no royal duties, traditions, or discipline, only pure personal influence. For those who still hoped for reconciliation, the signs weren't encouraging, and the distance had hardened into silence. Between Harry's brand to safeguard and William's nation to serve, There was a bond that had the narrative would be debated for years about who was right and who was wrong, who betrayed whom, but ultimately, the family's inability to handle it was more tragic than the damage or even the celebrity. What had once been unshakable was now hardly recognizable. Harry exchanged a life of obligation for one of freedom. Sometimes love doesn't look like fairy tales. Meghan sacrificed tradition for attention, and William, who was in the midst of it all, lost a sibling while attempting to save him.